difference? You. Long time. And that because they skew things and they take their position, which is often on most issues a pro-corporate, pro-status quo position, and they privilege it and call it objective. Think about what an amazing trick that is. So now my corporate position is the objective position, and if anyone disagrees with the status quo, you're radicals and wrong by definition, because I define my position as the objective one. And here in the case of Israel, they're saying when Palestinians attack, as we'll get to the details in a second, we're to call them terrorists and all these terrible ways they use slaughter and massacre. When Israel attacks and kills more civilians, both as a ratio of civilians to combatants, and of course, overall raw numbers, much more than the terrorists, do not ever call them terrorists. Okay, look, you could say maybe the word terrorist is debatable in the context of a state actor. Okay, I'm willing to have that discussion. Genocide, hey, the UN didn't call it a genocide yet. I think it meets every definition, but okay, you say I'm not ready to do that yet because the UN hasn't said it. Ethnic cleansing, textbook ethnic cleansing, but it's too controversial, whatever, okay? The ethnic cleansing is really on it, like you have to call it that, but okay. But even all of those, but when you refuse to call it a refugee camp filled with refugees, a refugee camp, you're just basically saying I'm cheating and I'm taking the pro-Israel position, right or wrong, and then I'm calling it objective. And hence anyone who doesn't agree with Israel is now a radical and is detached from reality and is subjective and opinionated and biased. Whereas our Israel bias that is overwhelming is objective and the truth.
Look, I understand why the New York Times might not want to use the word genocide, right? But what was really fascinating to me was the direction that the reporters were given, like what word they should use instead of genocide. You know what word that is? Massacres. So Jake, massacres is a word that really hits a nerve with me.
Massacres. Yeah, she's talking about how the the New York Times is doing the same thing today that Eichmann did back during the Nazi times, which makes the New York Times not look so good because Eichmann used bureaucratic language that they called Amtssprache, official bureaucratic language, to break down and break away the human element, to dehumanize the parcels, the human beings that they're putting on trains and shipping off to various camps. That was called the Holocaust. Holocaust means a burnt sacrificial offering, which kind of says that the Nazis did it in a ritual sacrifice-y type of way, which I don't know if that's a thing. But we will hear from Moloch later with Bertrand Russell, because that's going on. So there's a whole situation that ties in between like the red heifer and then what you might see going on today as far as continuity of a super heavy-handed fascist outlook. That seems unconscionable, but you just heard it from the New York Times' own people, that's how they work internally. And that's
who funds the New York Times. Just asking for a friend.
What's the history and evolution of that institution? Jeez.
Yeah.
We might
whether there's any sort of Zionist sympathizers behind that entire operation or not. Just asking for a friend.
Asking for a friend, because those are dangerous questions. Not a dangerous thing to do is to repost tonight's episode. And this is most definitely not William Yandel Elliott. That's LD's secret handle right there. So he puts it out, and then Ian White says, "Sweet title, thanks, Ian." Yeah, cool. All right, so thank you for passing on the good word, because too few people listen to this show. I would like to think that there are more people who are of the intellectual acumen to appreciate such connotations on evidence and elucidations of our observations, that it would be more fortifying to like share it widely with conscious people, because freedom is it's like a candle in the wind, and like Elton John on a Saturday night, it's getting blown out. No, sorry.
Elton John.
There are no writers for this show, in case you did not notice that. There's no teleprompter over here. This is no Jimmy Fallon. This is no Conan O'Brien.
Oh. We're definitely not comedians, but it's funny.
It is. It's funny. It's funny to a point. And we could go into the history of the New York Times. I mean, if I were to look it up over here, New York crime.
Sex Coburg goes. No, I'm just joking. That's the first thing on the screen.
They might be connected.
Let's start
If we
with
go,
the 17th century.
hey, we could connect those. I can get the August Belmont right here. That's the Rothschild agent in America that had some influence at one point. Because this place has been around since 1851, Tony, and it's a Democratic newspaper, and Democrats are the party of slavery. This is their outpost in New York, in the Union. And I wouldn't be surprised if maybe like a young Solomon Rothschild. No, he died before this started. But more seriously, you've got things like the Operation Mockingbird that it participated in, along with the Washington Post and a number of other places. But long story to tell with the Adolf Ochs family and their relationship with this group right here. So you wouldn't want to question the New York Times because very interesting organization structure that they have over history. That's enough on that. We could go on that all night. That could be a whole episode. All right. Let me put this we don't need the next New York Times censorship. I'll just tell you this one story. Israel blocks UN October 7th investigation. And as Gomer Pyle would say, surprise, surprise, surprise. All right, so we saved 10 minutes with that. And now we get some more juicy stuff. We got not Lord Sachs. We talked about Lord Sachs last week. This week we have the American version counterpart. His name's Jeffrey Sachs. And he had some choice words to say about the United Nations and that they should probably make Palestine a state now, because if you wait too long, there's nothing left to make a state out of, kind of thing, because it's ethnic cleansing and the cleaning's almost done. If you've looked at the maps, people used to be in the whole thing in the occupied territories, and they're being driven out and concentrated in one area that's about to be invaded by Bibi, who just got 24 billion new dollars to use in that war. So there's like that whole machination going on right there. And then we have an Israeli prime minister who admits that, quote, Jews didn't originally come from Israel, end quote, which I didn't think was a big surprise because it's in the Bible. Like, apparently they're wandering around, then they ended up in Egypt, and then they split the sea and got lost for 40 years. Then they got to Promised Land, and the dude was like, I'll pay you 3,000 years later, or something like that. Like, that's, I know it's hard to abbreviate the story down to 30 seconds, but that's kind of the gist. So it's interesting that this is a newly found admission, but I think it does play into the claims of returning to a place that's always been there and promised. Because the past 2 weeks, we've played clips where they said, you can't go back multiple generations and make that claim. So they use it in their side of the argument, but when you play it to the other side, they're like, no, you can't use that. So it's an interesting dichotomy. So that's going to be brought to us by Kim Iverson. And then we'll be back because the question of how long can this conflict go on? It goes on until the United States and the UK stop funding Israel and giving them bombs. And as you just see, I mean, they just sent 64 billion to Ukraine, and they sent 24 billion to I almost said Iran. I'm sorry, Israel, who wants to like go to war with Iraq and Iran right now. So I don't know if you know how the official story of how World War I started, but this looks a little bit like the official story. And when you look behind the official story, it also looks like the conspiracy behind that. Like they're going to set some dominoes in effect over there, and all of a sudden it's going to come over here, and we got to live under rationing and, you know, surveillance and lights out and a whole bunch of like
the Iran situation is really the key because of the Iran. That's where oil would go haywire, and that's where your, you know, diesel engines, so people, you know, shipping goods and, you know, providing, you know, services to, that's where you're going to feel the impact. So if there's a larger regional conflict thanks to Iran being brought into this, that's going to be, and I've listened to maybe too much Jimmy Doris, Scott Ritter, which you only take pieces of what he says because
sure.
He's, you know, but still interesting perspective nonetheless, I must say. And you know, it's seemingly only partly true, but nonetheless, in regards to Iran's, you know, capabilities, but much more sophisticated than one would thought, you know, probably also funded by us. In the 1970s, in fact, they were. That's why they had the F-14s, the air base that was hit recently this week by Israel. That was funded in the 1970s, or given over in the 1970s, F-14 Tomcats, I believe, by America, you know, before the coup that took place, also American-backed, so or Anglo-American backed. So, you know, there's a lot, to your point, there's many domino pieces in place that they want, you know, the internationalists want them to fall in a particular way. They certainly have the capability to help that, you know, precipitate and manifest those sorts of manifest that sort of world they want. In which case, all of a sudden, there are price shocks, there's supply issues to the domestic front, all because of a war in the Middle East that we shouldn't have been involved with in the first place. While they're weaponizing mythologies, as far as I'm concerned. So someone's calling them theologies, whatever. They're stories. They're weaponizing old 3,000-year-old stories in order to justify the actions that are taking place now. It's just a level of irrationality that is, quite frankly, terrifying for someone like me who studies logic to witness.
Yeah. Well, people have the right to believe irrational things. You just don't have the right to take away other people's freedom with it. And in the midst of all this kind of catching on to them, I think this brewing war scenario, what's the first thing they can do? They can crack down on people with dissident mentalities, critiques of the government. They can put people in camps. They can do a whole bunch of stuff. So it could be like the second version of a COVID lockdown, right? Where they could have the new war powers and cut off civil rights.
I think it only happens if there's a supply shock. But if there's a supply shock because of oil, because of the
terrorist attacks, you got a bunch of half a million migrants running around. Yeah, so it's
easy. Right.
They can have all sorts of stuff going on.
You're absolutely right. Yeah.
And
then blame it on Islamic Jihad, sort of like they did with the Russian terrorist attacks that happened recently, or the ISIL or ISIS, the Islamic State. That's something. So maybe correspond the two together if such an event were to manifest or happen in America, which God forbid, I hope it does not. And we both hope that never manifests in any capacity. But if something like that happens, it's probably a larger reason why it's happening. And we can go back to the idea of the Muslim Brotherhood. What the British
they weren't even working with us at that point when they did that project. We just inherited. Alan Dulles bought that project. It's like buying a corporation. They're like, "Would you like an Arab proxy army list?" And Alan Dulles is like, "Fuck yeah, bro." And then you have 9/11. So one last thing: as all these realizations and epiphanies are coming out, the powers that be that can be easily named, they want to do cyber war, right? So you're going to see a bunch of stories running out there like this. Rosemary's Baby had a particular plot. And then you've got, Kate Middleton in pretty much the exact same dress, bro. Right. So, there is something to this. Okay. But my point would be, so the claim is on April 23rd, 2018, Kate Middleton wore a dress identical to Rosemary's Baby, which is about child sacrifice and Satanism and all this sort of stuff, right? Royal family. Okay.
I remember watching that as a kid. That was the woman gives birth to essentially Satan. I believe.
It's right.
The
it's
baby
probably
is
what
Satan
they watched on a first date. God bless them. They're just like being nostalgic. So I guess the point would be about that. Yes. That looks like that's somebody knew, right? Now here's my other point. Why are you seeing this today? Why is everyone on Twitter seeing this today? This is a photo, this is a video from 2018. And the movie they're talking about was made in 1970s by a famous pedophile, Roman Polanski, who had to go hide in France because they allow that sort of thing, and age of consent's 14 or something. So there's a whole known. When she wore that dress, everybody knew that's the Rosemary Baby dress. When this was published, everybody in the public knew that's the Rosemary Baby dress. Why did it never get circulated so widely until today, to the point where you could search Rosemary Baby dress or whatever, and it's going to show you Kate Middleton, right? So there's a Google search algorithm associated with people finding this. And so anyway, I just thought it was interesting. It's like if an airplane is being pursued by a heat-seeking missile, it puts off starbursts to try to get the missile to hit that instead of the engines. That is a starburst. It didn't come out today. That was in the tank and waiting for fire to be received. They see they've got heat-seeking interest going on, and they're like, start putting out the starburst. Show them some stuff. Have Tucker Carlson tell them about underwater craft vehicles on Joe Rogan. No, seriously though, we have serious topics to cover. That's a whole nother thing. A whole nother thing.
What makes the Grand Theft World podcast unique, invigorating, exciting, and informative? Most other podcasts out there are either doing straight up interviews or they're just covering the daily news. They're covering current events from the day they happen. And that is effective. It's useful. It's a great starting point. And then sometimes these current events change during the week past the first story. So we like to give it a little time. You have to wait till some of the dust settles on these stories in order to give them accurate coverage. And the other thing that's really missing in the media landscape is covering the articles that are coming out every day. That's great. That's necessary. But who's bringing in contextual history so that you can understand what has been going on for decades and decades to lead up to the machinations and actions that we see unfolding today? So what we do here on the podcast is we cover current events. Many of these things are censored, but we wait about a week. As a forensic historian, I focused mainly through my career on the history of globalism and collectivism and things that they call maybe the New World Order. There's a lot of facts to these sort of circumstances, groups, events, activities, working groups that they've had over time. So for Grand Theft World listeners, we not only break down the current events, most of which that are censored during the week, we provide you with contextual history, we give you the source notes, the references, we do deep dives, and this really empowers you with an understanding of context and history so that you can make more informed decisions in your life. There's also a community, a membership where you guys can actually ask questions and we can get into the show and we can share evidence. And there's a town hall weekly for Grand Theft World for those who listen to it and are interested in covering the stories that we don't get to during a 6-hour show. Listening to it an hour a day, you could easily consume the week's news, but you're going to have substance and meaning and context and understanding. And with that, you can make higher quality decisions in your life. So if you're interested in more quality in your life, go to grandtheftworld.com, click podcast at the top, and we'll see you there. Thank you.
These allegations are false.
This isn't Grand Theft Auto, folks. This isn't a video game.
What are the most surprising things that you discovered once you started pulling on that thread? Who he was connected to, what institutions he was influential over, what events he participated in?
Come on, man. What are we talking about? Come on, man.
No.
You don't have to think about it, dude.
I got this quote because you said you didn't know much about Klaus Schwab. I made it my job to, as soon as this happened, I'm like, okay, this guy's their front man. Let me learn about the official history of the World Economic Forum. I got their 40-year history. I got every book that Klaus Schwab has written or ghostwritten. I went through those books. This is one of the most interesting passages.
Come on, man. Come on.